La Comisión para el Esclarecimiento de la Verdad, la Convivencia y la No Repetición, en cumplimiento de sus funciones constitucionales y legales, recolecta información contenida en entrevistas, imágenes, videos, audios, entre otros, con fines extrajudiciales para el esclarecimiento histórico de violaciones a los derechos humanos e infracciones al derecho internacional humanitario, contrastación y elaboración del informe final para fines estadísticos, promoción de reconocimientos de responsabilidades colectivas, convivencia y no repetición. En este marco, la Comisión está realizando el presente evento. Con su permanencia y o participación en el evento, manifiesta que autoriza el tratamiento y uso de sus datos personales e imagen, en el entendido de que el registro audiovisual y fotográfico tendrá la vocación de ser público y podrá ser transmitido en diferentes escenarios y plataformas de comunicación y espacios digitales.
5, 4, 3, 2. Okay, Laura.
Hello, I think
Hello.
we're on. I'd like to welcome you all to this really exciting and important seminar. It's a dialogue between Commissioner Dr. Carlos Beristain of the Colombian Truth Commission and academics from Northern Ireland on the process of recognizing the importance of truth and memory for victims and survivors of conflict. This event is framed by the Colombian Truth Commission's work in the UK and in Ireland. The dialogue will provide opportunity to compare and share experiences relating to the peace process in Northern Ireland and in Colombia. The institutions are committed to promoting dialogue on truth and memory issues in the cases of Colombia and Northern Ireland. And we're seeking to engage with a large audience in the UK, Ireland, and Colombia. And greetings to you all and following this. And the event will be broadcast in English and Spanish. And just by way of background, the Colombian government signed a peace agreement with the largest guerrilla group, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, in 2016. And the Colombian Truth Commission is one of the peace agreement mechanisms. It focuses on victims, their right to truth, and recognition of the human rights abuses and violations they have suffered. Through its work, the Commission has sought to break the silence imposed on so many victims and survivors of human rights violations and abuses in Colombia. And this silence has been imposed by impunity. It's not accidental. It has been a central tactic of the internal conflict in Colombia. And one of the things that adds to this is exile. In order to help break the silence, the Commission has organized many events in which survivors have been invited to share their life stories in public. And this event today is part of that process of ensuring the human rights abuses and violations that the people have faced in Colombia are acknowledged and there is awareness of them raised internationally. And one of the events opened earlier today at Elsters McGee Library, and it runs until 10th of January. It's an exhibition of dolls made by Colombians in exile. And the process of making the dolls allows participants to reflect on their experiences and perhaps weave some of their stories into the dolls they made. So those of you who are anywhere near McGee, you might like to attend that exhibition. And the timing of today's conversation with Commissioner Beristain is important as the Commission will launch its concluding report on the 27th of June 2022. And the report aims to provide Colombian society with the tools to demand the changes necessary to end impunity and dismantle the structures beyond the end of violence to help dilute polarization and work towards non-repetition. To do this involves in confronting powerful vested interests and as such requires strong governmental commitment and also international support. And so this event is partially targeted at garnering that international support. And so the Commission hopes that today's events and the exhibition in Derry will help garner support from academia, civil society representatives, and politicians in Northern Ireland and beyond. So I'm delighted to welcome you all. And I'll now introduce the Commissioner and the panelists. Dr. Carlos Beristain is a Spanish doctor with a PhD in psychology. He has extensive experience in the mediation of conflict around the world and is an expert in the in accompaniment of victims. He was coordinator of the Guatemala Recovery of Historical Memory Report and an advisor to the Truth Commissions of Paraguay, Peru, and Ecuador, and has carried out research projects on victims of human rights violations. He is currently the only foreign commissioner in Colombia's Truth Commission and is charged with coordinating the work of the commission at the international level. And the panelists, Dr. Lauren Dempster is a lecturer in law in the School of Law, Queen's University, Belfast. Lauren's research is interdisciplinary in nature. She draws on the fields of transitional justice, criminology, law, anthropology, and politics in particular. Her research interests include efforts to deal with the past in Northern Ireland, disappearances, and transitional responses to disappearing, victim mobilization, and the intersections between transitional justice and environmental harm. Roberta Batchik is a curator, a Chilean human rights advocate, and a researcher living in Northern Ireland. And since 2007, she's curated more than 150 international exhibitions of Apiara dolls. I'm sorry, that pronunciation was probably wrong. Associated with events in museums, universities, art galleries, embassies, and community spaces worldwide. And over time, these exhibitions have expanded from Chilean dolls focused on the Pinochet dictatorship to include quilts and other textile narratives of loss, resistance, testimony, protest, and healing from around the world. The use of textile language in contested spaces has been at the center of her curatorial work. Brandon Hamber is the John Hume and Thomas P. O'Neill Chair in Peace, based at the International Conflict Research Institute at Ulster University. He is also a member of the Transitional Justice Institute and an honorary professor of the African Centre for Migration Society at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. He's consulted in a range of community groups, policy initiatives, and government bodies in Northern Ireland and South Africa. He's undertaken consulting and research work and participated in various peace and reconciliation initiatives in Liberia, Mozambique, Bosnia, the Basque Country, and Sierra Leone, among others. He has written extensively on the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the psychological implications of political violence, masculinity, and the process of transition and reconciliation in South Africa, Northern Ireland, and abroad. Peter Drury is the representative of the Colombian Commission for the Clarification of Truth, Coexistence and Non-Repetition in the UK, and has been involved in some research work in which the Commission is engaged. He's a human rights researcher and campaigner, and much of his research work over many years has focused on Colombia. He worked in the Colombia research team of Amnesty International for over 20 years, carrying out much work on corporate responsibility issues, amongst other topics. He's also worked for Oxfam and Global Witness, and as a Peace Brigade's international volunteer in Colombia. He's obtained MAs in Latin American Studies and International Law at the University of Liverpool and SOAS in London. He's embarking on further postgraduate study on corporate accountability issues in Colombia. And so that's the introduction of Commissioner Berestein and the panelists. So I'll turn now to Commissioner Berestein for his presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for this presentation. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Okay, thank you.
Peter, todos. Yo voy a hacer una presentación muy corta.
I'm going to do a very short presentation, a very brief introduction, because I'm very interested in
Tener un diálogo
listening
también.
to all of you and to have a conversation as well. Those of you who have participated in the experience of the arpilleras that Roberta has worked with. Among other things and other areas in the Commission of Truth, I have been in charge of compiling the experiences of Colombian exile. That Colombia that's outside of Colombia, that doesn't exist in the country. The story has not been taken into account, not even in the statistics. It's a way of giving a space to that story. The people who have been outside of the country.
Necesita entrar en diálogo con.
This is something that needs to be talked about and that needs to come into dialogue with that other Colombia within its borders. This work has taken us to compile many testimonies, more than 2,000 testimonies, just of people who are in exile all over the world, based on trust. In order to talk about these difficult situations and to open up your heart, the base, of course, has to be trust. There has to be trust for people to open up. We know that when people give their testimony, when they make a drawing or when they make an arpillera, they go back to that nightmare. They have to relive the horror of what they've experienced. And that hurts. And we need to do that in a context that allows us to share it and to make many of these lived experiences, give them a new meaning over distance and over the comprehension of the other. John Berger, a British person from university, in one of his writings, he says that sharing pain, well, that really pain can't be shared. Only the people who have suffered them can experience them. But in the attempt at sharing that pain, resistance is born. And I think that that attempt at sharing that pain is the basis of a truth commission. We're not trying to relive the past. We're trying to strengthen that resistance. This is not only an individual work, it's a collective work as well, in which when we work with victims in exile and we work collectively, sometimes people feel caught up in the other's experience. They feel like the other's experience is part of their own life, of their own story. And within that context of communication, the other person gives back to you. The other person is a mirror to you, a mirror that shows, that reflects back your own image. People often treat people as if their lives are worth nothing. And these reconciliation projects work with this strength of mutual identification, mutual relating, not just the artistic expression of an individual expression of pain or resistance through other languages, but it's also about sharing it with others and making this into a puzzle, a mosaic of a shared experience of many people, especially in exile. This is a very powerful experience because exile is a non-place in the world. The people in exile are not from here or from there. They can't go back to where they come from, but they're never really from the place where they arrived. And they lose that concept of citizenship or even a right to speak. The reconstruction through testimonies, through collective work, through art, it's a space to build your own space. Those of us who have been victims or have been displaced or who have not been, well, we can learn a lot from them too. Knitting, creating an artillera, it's a way of going back to the scene of the crime. It's going back to the loss, to the time of fleeing. It's not like the bad guy from the movies. It's not like the bad guy that goes back to the scene of the crime to erase his prints. No, the victim goes back to the scene of the crime through art in order to assimilate the footprints, not to erase them, to assimilate what was left behind and what was experienced instead of trying to delete all evidence. And I think that from that creation till the time, it's a very different time. It's a time that's not just news. It's not just a story or a drawing or history. It's not just a play, a theatrical play. It lets us hear things in a different way. It's not a time in which things happen. Perhaps it's a time in which we understand how things happen. It's not the news itself. It's a time to experience. And I think that that's an important part of these exchanges, these types of creations through art. When we speak of difficult situations, experiences, we have to look for languages that will help us express these things. A truth commission is based on building these stories and creating patterns that will help us explain. It's also a way of recognizing through a social framework the individual experiences, because many times people have experienced things or their experiences have been denied or suppressed from collective memory. So it's important to give that context. Those experiences are also part of a collective experience that allow us to feel at least a bit of what the other person has felt, to be touched by their experience. It's not just expression, it's a space of communication. And a big part of the work that many of you have done is that many of these experiences of communication are very, very important. And I'll end on this note. When we were compiling testimonies, and we went to many different countries, visiting many different people, many people would talk to us about the suitcase, what the suitcase represented or meant in exile. For Colombians, many times people had a suitcase put away with things that they brought with them, or things that if they ever managed to go back home, they would like to take with them. And we did a short exercise that we called Living Archaeology of Exile. Objects that are significant for people from the experience of exile, of resistance. They express more of what people have lived. It's not just the testimony. We want to make an entire exhibition with these living archaeologies because they're things that have been buried for a long time in the memory or in experiences or in the homes put away under the beds. There are many stories that can be told through these objects that are saved and put away. A drawing, a letter, an object, something that somebody took with them that shows the bond of exile that keeps them connected to where they came from. All of these are part of the things that can be activated in our work, and I'm very happy that we can have this exchange through many friends that have shared these spaces and these paths over these lives. And it's so beautiful to share this experience with Roberta. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much for a very powerful presentation. I'm now going to ask all the panelists to give a short presentation of about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we'll come back to questions. And I'll start first with Dr. Dempster. If you would give us your presentation, please.
Thank you, Siobhan. Well, I don't have a presentation.
There you are.
Just ask you a brief response to the Commissioner's comments. So Thank you to the Commissioner for his words, and thank you to Roberta for inviting me to participate today, and for everyone up at Ulster for welcoming me up here today. So in terms of my response to the Commissioner's presentation, I guess there's three key aspects that sort of spoke to me in terms of how they align with my own work. So by way of background, my PhD research focused on the disappearances that were perpetrated in Northern Ireland during the period known as the Troubles, the armed conflict here. And I've been involved in a number of research projects since, looking at issues of legacy in the context of Northern Ireland. So I'll speak from that experience today. So one of the things that struck me about what the Commissioner said was he mentioned the importance of trust in processes of transitional justice. This was a really important theme in my own research on the disappearances that were perpetrated in Northern Ireland in terms of the Independent Commission for the Location of Victims' Remains, which is the commission that was set up to recover the remains of the disappeared. A key reason why that worked was trust between those who were expected to give information to the commission and the commissioners themselves. And really that was central to the relative success of that institution. So I'd be interested to hear what the Commissioner and other panelists have to say about trust in transitional justice and how we can go about building trust in contexts where often societies might be highly divided, or people might have been on opposing sides of the conflict in the past. So I was interested in him mentioning the role of trust. A second sort of thread, I guess, which is of interest to me, is the Commissioner spoke of these stories that emerge beyond Columbia itself, beyond the boundaries of the country it's produced, and all of the sorts of grassroots truth recovery or truth telling work that goes on elsewhere. So in Northern Ireland, we have a really rich civil society. We have a large number of victims groups and local NGOs who've engaged in different forms. And so I would be interested to know what the panelists think about the sort of different sources of truth that we have, and how maybe a formal truth report, the role that it plays, and how that maybe differs, or what it does that's different to different types of grassroots truth telling, and maybe how they all come together in terms of overall developing a picture of the past. I mean, the Commissioner used the language of a puzzle or a mosaic of shared experiences, and I think that's really a really helpful phrase to use. So that's one of the things that I was reflecting on. The final point that I guess I want to make before I hand over to the next respondent would relate to this idea of truth as resistance. So in the Northern Ireland context, something that's become a really important tool for relatives of those killed during the conflict is Article 2 of the European Convention of Human Rights, so the right to life, and the positive obligation under that for an independent and effective investigation into killings by the state. So in campaigns by families of those whose loved ones were killed by the state, we see this language of Article 2 of the need to have an independent and effective investigation. So, for instance, I did a bit of work on this a couple of years ago, and like looking through, newspaper reports, you can see families using this language of Article 2. So one example would be the families of those killed in the Ballymurphy massacre in Belfast, and they at events related to that, they were talking about the need for an Article 2 compliant inquest, and they actually, the findings of the inquest came out earlier this year, and it did find that all 10 were innocent, and that the state use of violence was not justified. So that sort of showed like the strength of decades of mobilization on the part of these families, and it also showed the power that the inquest system can have. So I guess my final sort of thought around all this is something where we have the truth as a form of resistance, and in particular in the Northern Ireland context, where we do have this strong role played by people using the language of Article 2 and this duty to investigate state killings. We've had all of this mobilization for decades, and we're at a point now where the UK government was going to introduce a broad and unconditional amnesty for killings, or indeed for all crimes actually related to the Troubles. So I'd be interested to hear the Commissioner's view on how you can have a sort of effective truth recovery process in the context of a broad amnesty. So a second aspect of that is that the government is introducing this amnesty, and they're also setting up an information retrieval board, which is quite limited in its powers. So I'd be interested to hear what the other participants and the Commissioner think about whether or not it's possible to have an effective and comprehensive truth recovery process in the context of a wide amnesty, which is what is looking is coming down the line for Northern Ireland. So those are my few key points. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you very much. I'll turn now to Roberta Batchik, please.
Hello to everybody. I was thinking that more than responding to what Carlos has said, I will echo Carlos. As we have been transiting roads and spaces for almost 40 years. And so in this Los Caminos de la Vida, we have been coinciding.
The paths of life.
We have been coinciding or not coinciding physically, but in our work, in our accompaniment. I'd like to stress that whatever I'm going to say today is possible thanks to the whole team of Conflict Textiles. This is a collective work. I truly believe that we do everything together. And although I'm speaking, I am including everybody, not only Conflict Textiles, but also the team at CAIM that archives and makes available all this material. Taking from Carlos, I will say that the textile language has really allowed us to speak the unspeakable. It has also allowed us to touch it, to make it a bit more tender. We can caress it, we can connect it, we can smell it, and it allows us also to keep our eyes to the stitching without having to face or look at the eyes of the other person, so we can go in and out at different tempos, at different moments. And I think that is very, very important to say from this idea of using the dolls as a mediator, but they are also an incarnation of the characters. It's not for therapy per se, it's to be able to live, as Carlos said, and relive, but in a way in which we can deal with it today. Because our life in the present is marked by the experiences of the past, but we don't want to be stuck with it. We need to work on it. So the workshops of the dolls has been enabling that element. And it's not only about what the dolls say. Very important is the reaction of what they bring out of the people who look at them. This morning, while we were launching very modestly here at the library, a couple of people who were there had not seen the textile, had no experience with the dolls, but were touched by them. And they had even the greater experience to be able to listen to the makers. So it became a voice, it became a testimony, it became a mediator between all of us. And I think that is extremely important also, because when Carlos mentioned trust, I do feel that these dolls are mediators, and mediators between the horror, but also highlight the continuity of life. It brings us to life and to remember that we are actors and that we also have other people who support us, and we have brave moments of being together and bringing that not as individual cases, but as collectives. It brings out also solidarity, and it also brings out resilience and resistance. So those elements are interwoven into the stitches, into the characters, and the expression of participants when they see them on display is immense. Today we had also the possibility to show the envelopes in which these dolls came to my home, because we had to have the workshops online. So it was another mediator, good old Royal Mail, bringing day after day, 20, 21, 23, 26 envelopes, and then with Deborah opening them and finding the treasures behind them and seeing what we had to see. So there would be lots for dialogue, and I would leave it there. But I want to finish with a poem that was done in 2010 by a Chilean Mapuche poet as a gift to me for an exhibition in Brazil, as we had completed 35 years of friendship, and he had been my student as a 12-year-old boy. And it's called Las mujeres salieron a la noche. Las mujeres salieron a la noche
The
y
women came out
buscaron
at
el hilo
night,
del rocío,
and they searched for the thread of
pero
dew,
solo hallaron las
but they
pisadas
only found the
de sus
footsteps
insomnes
of
amados
their
muertos.
sleepless, beloved
El,
deceased.
el hilo de la papa hallaron y
The thread of
mascaron,
potatoes they found,
y el hilo de las hojas
and
de
later the thread
enlazar,
of leaves in the cornfield,
el hilo de la piedra de moler,
the thread of the grinding stone,
y el zumbido de las grises mariposas que
and the buzz
aletearon
of
en
gray
la pobre
butterflies that fluttered in the dim light
de sus viejas
of
nubladas
their
pupilas.
old, foggy orbs.
Las ovejas huyeron quizás
The
donde,
sheep ran away, who knows where,
los zorzales quizá
the
en qué
thrushes,
silencio.
who knows in which silence.
Los niños habitaban
The
los
children
buscados,
inhabited the gunshots,
en quién sabe qué
who
escondrijo,
knows in which hideout,
de las blancas montañas
in the
distantes.
distant white mountains.
¿Dónde hallar el hilo de la luna?
Where to find the thread of the moon,
El hilo de las aguas
the thread
prometidas.
of the promised waters,
Solo harapos de nombres y de
only
voces,
rags of names and voices,
pedazos de camisas enterradas,
pieces of buried shirts,
botones de plástico y de níquel,
plastic and nickel buttons,
retazos de chalecos y bufandas,
fragments of vests and scarves,
las ropas encharcadas de la
the
muerte,
puddled
uniéndose a
garments
la
of
tierra,
death joining the earth, the mist,
soltando los tintes, las costuras, el tibio algodón de la sábana.
releasing the pigments, the seams, the warm cotton of sheets.
El amor de las mujeres era oscuro,
The love of the women was dark,
un susurro chocando contra piedras,
a whisper crashing into stones,
un arroyo regresando a su origen y a las fibras de árboles remotos.
a stream coming back to its source and to the fibers of faraway trees.
Esto es todo lo que hay en nuestra casa.
This is all you can find in our house.
Una aguja, una lámpara, un telar.
A needle, a lamp, a loom,
Una mesa de madera bruta y unos platos de aluminio rotos.
a raw wooden table, and some broken aluminum plates.
Las mujeres se agotaron en el sueño, cosiendo y descosiendo sus visiones, tejiendo
The
punto
women
a
were worn
punto,
out in the dreams, sewing and unsewing their visions, knitting stitch by stitch.
un frágil sol para el yerto corazón del universo.
A fragile sun for the stark heart of the universe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta, and thank you for that very
Gracias,
powerful poem.
Roberta, y gracias por ese poema tan poderoso.
I'm turning now to Brandon.
Y ahora doy la palabra a Brandon.
Good afternoon and good morning, and thank you very much for giving me the time this afternoon to speak with you. It's a great honor and a pleasure. I'm obviously very sad, Carlos, you could not be with us here in Northern Ireland because of the current restrictions and situation, but we're delighted that Peter is with us and through the conflict textiles to expand and create knowledge and awareness about your important work in the diaspora. So thank you for that and the opportunity to speak. My thoughts as you spoke today were perhaps slightly different, and what it made me really think about is the question of truth recovery and the diaspora, and how do we go about doing that. And you spoke to some of those issues, and I obviously want to congratulate the Commission on engaging in this work in the diaspora. As you mentioned yourself, not many have tried to do that. I think Liberia Commission had some work in the diaspora, but your work has been far larger and more extensive, and it's incredibly impressive. And it made me really think about the issue of exile. And as you were talking, I jotted down 4 things. And I think for societies that are coming to terms with the conflict, as you spoke about, the first area of violations, if we think of diaspora, is the violation of exile. So the violation of exile, of going into exile, of the displacement that causes, the loss, the grief, the lack of belonging, the issues that you articulated. And I think this is a very important area to think about in terms of human rights violations, because political violence for me is essentially about destroying people's sense of belonging. It's not about the physical harm that is done. Of course, that is a component of it, and there's a big impact in terms of physical and psychological harm. But often in political violence, that's exactly what those who perpetrate violence are trying to do, to break down belonging. It's why, as you know, in Latin America, when they disappear you, sometimes they disappear you and your papers. It's not just about trying to take you out of society, it's saying you have no place. And if we think of South Africa, what was apartheid more than anything else? Of course, direct human rights violations, but it was about telling people they have no citizenship, that they don't belong in their own country. And so the issue of looking at violations of exile are at the heart of political violence and why your work is so important. The second part, if we think of exile for me, is about the violations carried to exile. So these might be the violations that you experienced in your country, what happened to you in your country. The woman this morning at the launch of the Conflict Textiles exhibition spoke of the violations that were committed, directly to them and their families, and they have carried those with them into exile. And that's, of course, on top of the pain of moving out of your country. So for me, that's the second. But as you were talking, I was thinking there are 2 others, and they may or may not apply to Colombia, and I'm not enough of an expert. I've been there a few times, but I'm not an expert. The third area is violations from exile. And what I mean by that is not necessarily exile as such, but from outside of the country. So if I think of South Africa, those who financed the apartheid regime, the companies that did business with the apartheid regime, those who supplied vehicles and computer systems to ensure that those violations happened, many of that money was coming from out of the country. And so if we're thinking of the diaspora, how do we take that into account? And the South African Truth Commission struggled with that because it was very focused on individual violations. And then the fourth area, I would call it violations committed to people in exile. Again, I don't know if this was the case in Colombia. I'm certain on the borders of Colombia, it probably was the case. But in South Africa, for example, people who were in exile, the South African military raided across borders to kill people who had got into exile. There were elements of that in Northern Ireland, people killed across borders as well. And so how do we take that into account, the violations which crossed borders? And these are incredibly challenging questions for truth commissions and jurisdictions and legal jurisdictions. So that was my first thought, was really, of course, the violations of going into exile and how you take your direct violations with you, but then how borders work in political conflict. And I think this is something which is very much underexplored, how other countries support conflicts. And of course, You can talk about that in Colombia, I can talk about that in South Africa, and of course in Northern Ireland, there were countries which helped fund violence which took place, and then actual violence that crossed borders, and how do we take that into account in truth commissions. So that was the first sort of technical point. The second point really was more about the substance of what you spoke about, and I just wanted to reflect on something. You really spoke about the power of stories, the power of the narrative, the power of hearing, the suffering, and as Lauren actually articulated, in a place like Northern Ireland, there is a fortune of brilliant projects working on art and theatre and museums and memory, and of course conflict textiles is an example of these incredible artistic projects. But if I was to be challenging, and I'm not saying this about conflict textiles 100%, definitely not, but if I was to be challenging, there's a lot of storytelling, particularly in Northern Ireland, and at times there's not enough story listening. And so our real challenge is to get people to listen, not just to tell. Of course, there's a value in the telling, but how do we get people to listen? And the challenge there is that I think civil society can only take that so far. Because we still do need the official recognition of suffering. We still need the state to acknowledge suffering. We still need organized perpetrator groups to acknowledge the suffering. And so sometimes we need to create that context for the story listening to happen. And it's why people like Roberta and many others are really important, because they connect with other people, and they're connectors who allow the listening to happen. But if there was a challenge, I would say it's really about the listening that we're not very good at, I think, in societies in conflict. I'll end on this then. You mentioned the issue of the suitcase, and I thought that was wonderful. And I just had a little thought about it. In some of my work, I've written that one of the problems with the South African Truth Commission at times was they treated memory like it was a suitcase. And memory was something that you opened the suitcase, you could look in it, you could move it around, deal with it. And then once you had dealt with it, you could close the suitcase. And as a society, we would move on. And I think this is and this is not what you were saying, Carlos, but this is a very limited way of thinking, the suitcase idea of memory. And so I much preferred what you were talking about, because you were talking about the journey with the suitcase. And as you were talking, I was thinking, in a way, what we're really talking about is a backpack. It comes with you. And when societies have these terrible histories like South Africa and Northern Ireland and Colombia, this backpack, you can't get rid of it. You can't say, we're going to throw it away. The memory backpack is on your back all the time. And all we can do is to keep making initiatives, whether it's through civil society or like your official Truth Commission, that makes the backpack smaller, that makes the weight of that past smaller and smaller. And it'll never go away, but it can definitely be made smaller. And that's really our challenge. And that's why issues like truth commissions, reparations, each of those mechanisms, I think, can make that backpack a little bit smaller. And I think that should be our primary goal when we're trying to deal with these difficult pasts. So thank you for the opportunity today.
Thank you, Brandon, for it's a really powerful presentation. Thank you. I'll turn now to Peter Drury. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I was just going to talk a little bit about the experience of the work of the Commission in the UK, and then open the space up for the questions to Carlos and so on. So today we've launched an exhibition of Arpillera dolls at the McGee Building Library. And these dolls were made during workshops with members of the exiled Colombian community, primarily in the UK. This is one of many initiatives organised by the Truth Commission in Colombia and in some 24 countries, involving victims and survivors of decades of internal conflict in Colombia. And this fits in with what has already been said, that this commission is the first Truth Commission to systematically attempt to analyse and recognise exile as one of the impacts and violations of conflict. Now, core to the work of the Commission has been that of collating the testimonies of victims and survivors of human rights violations and breaches of international humanitarian law. And this work has posed many challenges within Colombia. Reaching out to people forced into exile posed additional challenges. One challenge was how to secure testimonies of people traumatized by what they have experienced. And when seeking to secure the testimonies of members of the exile community, the Commission sought to develop a before, during and after strategy to avoid re-traumatizing those giving their testimonies, to ensure that interviews were taken such that the person giving their testimony could do so in a manner which respected their dignity and ensured that they could tell their truth in their own way, and to invite those giving their testimonies to participate fully in the recognition process and other activities of the Commission. Another challenge was how to reach out to people living in exile in the UK. How do we contact exiled Colombians in the UK? So this was primarily achieved by involving the exile community itself in the UK and organising events, meetings to promote the work of the Commission, attempts to reach out to the media, particularly radio stations broadcasting to the Latin American migrant community in the UK. Fear, scepticism and anger has meant that many people were at first reluctant to give their testimonies. People were fearful that their testimonies would cause security problems for themselves or their families in Colombia. Attacks in Colombia against the Commission by state officials or former state officials suggesting it is favourable to guerrilla forces may have fueled scepticism towards the work of the Commission. Others may have been sceptical because the Commission is a state body, and as such, they were reluctant to trust it or believe that it could produce anything positive, since their exile was the result of state crimes. Anger has been evident, sometimes a product of the frustration resulting from being in exile and being forced to abandon one's life in Colombia. On occasion, exile has scuppered careers, broken up families, and so on. Divisions within the exile community has sometimes made the work of coordinating activities and inviting people to participate very difficult. So to overcome these problems, efforts were made to explain the work of the Commission, explaining what it could do and couldn't do, underlining the importance of its work and the giving of testimonies, and pointing out that the giving of testimonies was completely voluntary, and stressing that the Commission's creation was the result of the demands of the victims movement in Colombia itself. Ultimately, though, the key to overcoming many of these challenges related to ensuring that members of the exile community were invited to engage in the different activities of recognition. Recognition or acknowledgement is central to the work of the Commission. Through its work, the Commission has sought to break the silence imposed on so many victims and survivors of human rights violations and abuses in the country. This silence has been imposed by impunity. Impunity, as has already been pointed out, is not accidental. It has been a central tactic of the internal conflict in Colombia. Impunity is essential for combatants to continue committing human rights abuses and violations. Impunity sends a clear message to survivors that if you complain about the killing, forced disappearance, torture of your loved ones, you will be next. Moreover, if you do submit a complaint, who is going to investigate or believe you? The result has been that in so many cases, victims and survivors have been forced to bear the burden of what they have suffered in silence, to internalize those sufferings. Exile may add to this burden. Members of the Colombian exile community repeatedly express their frustration that when they say they are from Colombia, they are met with a stereotype: Colombia, drugs. In this context, it is not clear who you can tell your story to, a story which may not be understood or believed. The Commission then has sought to provide opportunities to break those imposed silences. And for this reason, many events have been organised in which survivors have been invited to share their life stories in public. This is part of the process of ensuring that human rights abuses and violations that they have faced are acknowledged in Colombia and internationally. In other cases, survivors and victims have been invited to participate in artistic activities in such a way that they can express their life stories. In the UK, for example, exiled Colombians participated in online writing workshops. These provided safe, friendly spaces for social interaction and to examine different experiences of exile. People who stated that they had never attempted to write before participated by writing prose or poetry. The pieces produced either literally described experiences of exile or sought to express the emotions felt. Writing provided a means to express feelings and experiences that may have remained hidden away within the inner selves of the participants. The production of the Arpillera dolls provides another example. The process of making the dolls took place in safe space and was one which allowed the participants to reflect silently on their own experiences of exile, wedding possibly some of their stories into the dolls they made, perhaps part of their life stories they did not want to express publicly or verbally. For many in the exile community, the possibility to participate in events has been a very positive experience. It has provided them with a feeling that their stories are being listened to and acknowledged, that silence is being broken. They provided an important means to acknowledge exile as one of the violations of the conflict, to ensure that it is recognized in Colombia, where the exile of Colombians has remained largely invisible, as well as the international level. In carrying out its work, the Commission has counted on important international support. In the UK, the Commission has counted on the support of the UK's embassy in Colombia, NGOs, trade unionists, the Scottish Government and universities. And this has included the support, of course, of the Transitional Justice Institute at Ulster University, Conflict Textiles, and at the University of Ulster. The report the Commission will launch in June 2022 is not a judicial report. It will not seek to establish individual criminal responsibility in human rights violations. It does seek to establish collective responsibilities in these crimes. This includes the responsibility not only of the armed and security forces, guerrilla forces, and paramilitaries, but that of political, economic, whether national or international interests, and other civil society interests. In exposing these responsibilities, it aims to provide Colombian society with the tools to demand the changes necessary to end impunity and dismantle the structures behind the violence, and to help dilute the polarization that rules Colombia at present. So it works towards non-repetition. To do this, however, involves confronting powerful vested interests, and as such requires strong governmental commitment to fully implement the recommendations that will be contained in the report. A new administration takes office in Colombia in August 2022. International accompaniment to the report and its recommendations is crucial to provide the government with the political space to carry out the necessary changes, assuming it has the political will to do so. If not, this support is essential to send a clear message that the international community expects decisive action. Furthermore, this support is essential to create the political space for Colombian civil society to demand decisive action by the Colombian government to fulfill the Commission's reports or recommendations in safety. The importance of international support is underlined by reports in recent days of paramilitary death threats against human rights defenders, and articles written by a former senior communications strategist for the armed forces calling into question the integrity of the Commission's work. It is in this context that the Commission is keen to build its international support network. We hope the events that have been organised in Derry today and tomorrow will help garner support from academia, civil society representatives and politicians in Northern Ireland and beyond. The work of the Commission does not end with the report, and so it is essential that a strong national and international network is put in place to monitor follow-up to the report long after the Commission ceases to exist. And just to finish, once again, I'd like to thank the University of Ulster, Conflict Textiles, and including the library, McGee Library, for putting on the exhibition that was launched today. Thank you very much for the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for that very powerful last panel speech. Thank you. I will be opening the panelists to ask questions of each other, and also I will ask some questions, and there may be some questions coming in from the audience. But first of all, as I've been thinking, listening here, and I wanted to ask a question that is not part of the questions that suggested to me and maybe seem rather basic to you all. I was really moved by the Commissioner's reference to the suitcase, and then again thought about it when Brandon mentioned, but we don't want to just lock them up in a suitcase into the past. It's something that we move forward. I've been working, well, I was before COVID, working in Rio's favelas and working with residents of the favelas there, dealing with police violence. And there is a museum in the favelas of the building of the favelas when people came there, and there's objects, suitcases, clothes, shoes, and all of those things carry something quite powerful because they embody memory in a physical way. At least that was my experience of being in that museum. It's not just a museum of the past, because they continue having art exhibitions and music and films and debate. So it's not a dead place, but those objects from the past are still there. You can look at them and you can't touch them all. Some things you can touch, but, and that kind of tactile sense of memory came to mind when Roberta Batchik was talking about the dolls that she curates. But the question that I have is a really basic one. It's kind of connected to that, but only tangentially, is that I don't actually know. I've read about truth commissions in academic writing about the results of them and their impact and so on in South Africa and other places. Rwanda, I think there was an attempt at that. But I realize I don't actually know how they work. How are the testimony stories recorded on film or audio, or is it written? And how are they retained for the future? And how are they accessed? And what about the participants in there who have shared their stories? To what extent do they get to see the context of them, how they are presented, stored, and where they lie in relation to somebody else's story? Because I would imagine that where your story is located kind of tells something about how your story is viewed by the commission or the people organizing it. And I was just wondering how that process actually works. If there's anybody there who would be, could share that with me.
Bueno, gracias. Si quieres, doy yo.
Well, thank you. If you want, well, it's very different. They're very different stories in our case. In our case, it was very important from the start to be able to record testimonies, to be able to register the voice, at least, and to record the way the story was told, and not just to take notes, written notes, or to have a card where we took the notes. Because this is the treasure of the work, is the depth of the testimonies that we have been able to gather. No, obviously there was some other time we don't make them public. There were some times when consent was granted, where people were prepared to identify themselves, but normally we obviously are we've respected confidentiality. But almost all of the testimonies have been recorded, so that at the very least the transcripts can be read. And in some cases, when permission has been given, the voices can be listened to, so that it's possible to listen to the way that the stories have been told. We felt that that was very important. And all of this testimonies later on will be available. We work with an information service. We work on a transmedia platform where some of these testimonies will be available, where people have given their permission for their testimony, for their stories to be made public. Others have said, no, we don't want this to happen. Others have said that you can have access to the testimony, but with reserving the names. And others have just said, no, absolutely not public. That's part of the care that we have to take.
Yes.
But this transmedia platform is going to be available, so that it will be possible to hear people's voices. But it's not only going to be individual testimonies, for example, also collective testimonies and acts of memory that have been organized around the country, which, as Brandon has said, is so important. Because when I worked in El Salvador, for example, with the mothers, one mother called Guadalupe said, we know what happened. We, the victims, know what happened. They know what happened. The people who are responsible for the abuses, they know what happened. What we want is for society at large to know. And that was very important. That's important for the victims, of course, that society knows, but it also plays a very important role in the development of society itself, because it contributes to the creation of a collective memory, so that people won't just have, as Brandon said, have sort of looked at and closed the lid on the suitcase, as Brandon says, but we think that this process allows the weight to be reduced, as Brandon so eloquently put it. I've got the opportunity to deal with this testimony in a different way, it having been made public and it having been recognized. It gives me an opportunity to re-establish links, connections, because obviously violence has got individual and has got collective effects, but something that is common is that it breaks links between people. Violence breaks links between people, and one of the important things about working in the post-conflict period is to re-establish these links. This is one of the most important things about working in the post-conflict, that you can reconstruct. As has been said, when you go into exile or when you're a victim of violence, everything disappears. Your sense of associations with smells, the different associations that you had with things in your life, it's important to reconstruct those.
Thank you. That's very helpful and clarifies a lot for me. And I share
Can I say something?
the importance of reconnecting and drawing those trying to draw links together again, which means that as far as consent, people want that their stories can be heard by other people. Thank you. I think I'll just, as far as I'm aware, there's no questions in the chat, so I think I'll just for now open the panel for anyone to speak that would like to contribute.
I might want to say something in connection to what my experience was with the Chilean Truth Commission.
Thank you.
It didn't work in the way that Carlos is attempting to do it now with Colombia, which is, we know, the first time. But sometimes the testimonies, well, they come in a report, they are shortened, they are only about events. But what happened that through the testimonies, some outcomes came. And for instance, Chile opened the possibility of building memorials in the different areas where events had happened. So even though it wasn't the individual word, but it happened that the associations of relatives of the disappeared or the executed or the people in exile managed to have a space where to discuss it, to agree or disagree with the building of a memorial. But we have a publication with all the memorials in Chile from north to south. And you can call it la geografía de la memoria, the geography of memory. So it's also through what in the compilation of the process comes out, the things that you realize that would have to happen in a later stage. So I think this commission has gained advance and progress in recognizing that individuals should also have a space where to do that. Also in Chile, we have, since the first Truth Commission report came out in 1990, we have had every year a contest of essays on human rights for the Day of Human Rights. So people from civil society write essays, and sometimes it's somebody who has nothing to do with human rights, but creates and participates, and their stories broaden beyond the world of the people who have been affected. It sometimes filters into the civil society, because what we want is not to have a monologue between us. We really want the others who have not been so involved in the process to be able to listen and not to be afraid, not to see as an antagonism. So to see the production of these two things that I'm mentioning out of my memory, but also that there was a review of the curriculum of the police. So that was an outcome. You might not do it, but because of taking so many testimonies about the brutality, it was clear that there was state participation or allowance to happen. So it has an effect in the way it filters through other channels.
Thank you very much. That's really powerful and really interesting. I would imagine, as Peter was referencing, that those memorialization and bringing to the fore the memories, there's probably quite strong resistance from powerful interests who don't want those memories brought to the fore. I'm going to let you ask any questions you want to continue. I just have to look at the chat because I think there's something come through. The question in the chat is, what's going to happen after the report is launched?
Okay.
Okay. Yep, I'll answer.
Okay.
Okay, so after the publication of the report, the Commission will have 2 months to circulate it, to disseminate it. One of the difficulties that all of the truth commissions have had is that their mandate is finished basically on the day that they present their report. There's been no one who has been able to apply the pressure that is needed for the dissemination. There's been no one to provide to pressure so that the report is published and that it's present in that it doesn't just stay on the bookshelves in private houses, but that it becomes a tool that is available so that it keeps rolling, so that it keeps contributing to society. What Lauren said about Article 2, that families have mobilized around the basis of Article 2, that there was a tool there that they could use. We want the Commission to operate in the same way. We want it to be a lever to help ensure that there is progress at societal level. So the Commission has got 2 months to work after the Commission, where we can travel around the world and to the extent the country, and to the extent that we're able to travel internationally, that we can present the report, that we can organize dialogue, open meetings with the opportunity, providing an opportunity for discussion about the report and its findings to be carried out. And then by law, there must be a monitoring committee constructed or set up. And this is a body which has got the job of monitoring the implementation of the recommendations made by the Commission. There's not a question of gathering information, but the Commission with the committee will have the responsibility of monitoring the implementation of the recommendations. As Roberta has said, we're going to be making recommendations on security, on education, on impunity, on land issues, on structural problems, structural issues. And this committee, the monitoring committee, will be monitoring the extent to which the recommendations of the Commission have been implemented. And this, Peter spoke about this as well. We hope that the support network, the international support network that has been established, will also help us with that. In all the countries, what happens after the publication has depended on 2 things. What is the political will? What level of political will is there on the part of the government to advance the agenda suggested by the Truth Commission? And there have been different situations from country to country. There have been some cases, like in Argentina, for instance, with the creation of the CONADEP, which was the bestseller in Argentina for during many years. And then another one would be the situation of the report in El Salvador, where the report was never published. It took 17 years for the report to be published in El Salvador. And this demonstrates, well, different political attitudes in the two countries.
Thank you very much.
It's dependent on political will, and on the other hand, also the extent to which the victims and the organizations have provided the impetus, have worked hard to try and ensure that the agenda is continued.
I would imagine that
sometimes this requires long-term work, and that can have long-term results.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I was thinking that I would imagine for victims and survivors to campaign on that needs resources, and it depends on the ability, on how fractured the society is, how much they have to struggle to put food on the table and live. as against how much effort that they can bring to raise that profile of what happened in the past. There are some questions coming through in the chat, so I'll stop talking myself and pose some other people's questions. And so a question that has come through is, what is the role of academia in the process of the Commission? In particular, what role can academia play to bolster international support for the work of the Commission, and in particular in monitoring action by the Colombian state to take decisive action to implement the recommendations of the final report? The question is, what role can academia play, particularly in bolstering international support and basically pressuring the Colombian state to take action?
Bueno, yo creo que el rol es muy importante. Necesitamos una academia.
Well, I think that the role is very important. We need an academia that allows itself to be moved by experience, which is what the Commission is going to show. And the report of the Commission should hopefully be a tool for work with professors, students, study groups, not just in Colombia. I think that Colombia's experience is also, and the exercise of the discussion based on the Colombian experience, such as the discussion based on the experience of South Africa, comparing it to Northern Ireland or the Basque country, the opportunity to generate these spaces of discussion, of learning between different experiences, I think is crucial. Also to keep pushing for peace development. Colombia is in the midst of a peace process with FARC, but the ELN has not signed peace, and the war is still going on. And there are many other illegal armed actors. So there has to be a maintained effort for peace. I think that the possibility, not just in Colombia, but on the international scale, there are spaces of dialogue and work based on the report of the Commission as a key issue in order to maintain international attention on Colombia. Without that, we wouldn't have been able to achieve the peace process in Colombia, and we wouldn't have been able to create dialogue for learning, creating peace, transitional justice in the Colombian case. It's an example is trying to consolidate many of these, but also to offer different experiences for the rest of the world, right?
Thank you.
Can I add to that, Siobhan?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I suppose I just wanted to add a little bit to that and also link it to some of the earlier issues, because South Africa is a very good example of where you had a very strong set of recommendations coming out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And exactly as Carlos mentioned, there was no process put in place for after the commission. There was no monitoring committee. It relied on the government agreeing to the recommendations and then setting up something else to deliver the recommendations. And on top of that, maybe for another day, there was a whole lot of reasons for political will why they didn't do that. So it's really encouraging that the Colombian Commission has this monitoring committee. And how I think that links to academia is that what we didn't do in South Africa, for example, was literally sit down, put all the recommendations into a table and monitor them, every single year, every single month. How have we got on these recommendations? How far have we got? They literally fell out of the public consciousness in a very short period of time. And I would think that for academia, this is a very important role, that type of very careful monitoring of what's actually implemented. In Northern Ireland, I think the monitoring that went on around the recommendations for the reform of policing around the Patton report, which I can't remember now, 182 recommendations, I think, if I'm correct. Actually, that was monitored very, very carefully by government and other committees, certainly in the early days, and that was very powerful in actually implementing those reforms. So So I see a strong role for academia in that. And linking back to also what you said, Siobhan, I mean, one of the problems in South Africa is they recorded testimonies, but they're now sitting in an archive, and it's almost impossible to get to these testimonies. Of course, the testimonies themselves are memorialization, are recognition, and you have to put those into public. And so academia has a role to do that. And the final thing I would say, however, is that academia has a role to do that in partnership with each other, and in partnership with civil society, in partnership with activists. I don't think academia can do that alone. Often academia is detached from some of these realities, and so you need these partnerships to make that happen. But I think a strong a global academic network of monitoring the recommendations would be very powerful and very important.
Thank you. That's very strong. I think that probably answers one of the questions that has come up, but I'll read it anyway. What role would UK academia, civil society have in ensuring that the UK and other governments monitor closely and support efforts by the Colombian government? And that's similar to a question before. What role of the Colombian civil society in supporting demands to take decisive action? And I think I'm opening to anyone else to add to Brandon, but I think Brandon has addressed that question. But if anyone else wants to add anything to those questions.
Añadiría una pequeña cuestión.
I would just add something on the importance of the international role. The role of the international community in the case of Colombia is very, very important. It's not only a question for Colombian academics, but also for international academic community. This connection with Northern Ireland has been very important, for instance, with the Northern Irish academic community. And I think that engagement of the international academic community with the monitoring of the Commission would be very important too.
Thank you.
Well, the role of civil society internationally as well as governments. I mean, I think I just added it's obviously crucial about creating space. The very fact that we have this event, for example, today in Ulster University is crucial because it helps to create interest. It sends a clear message back to Colombia that there's interest at the international level. And this is important. One is moral support for Colombian civil society, to know that there are people listening, people are paying attention to what's happening in Colombia. It's also essential because it sends clear messages to the Colombian authorities that they can't just brush this report when it's published out of the way, assuming it doesn't have the political will to act on it. So these things are very important. And just to reiterate the point I think I was trying to make as well, is that in a context where there are still threats against human rights defenders, every day we're reading about threats against the human rights community in Colombia, people campaigning against impunity, that space is essential. Creating safe space for Colombian society is essential to be able to also to campaign for the implementation of the tools of the report. As Carlos has said, the Commission itself ends its mandate towards the end of the year. It ceases to exist. There will be a follow-up mechanism, but in a sense, the report is the beginning of the process, not the end. It's the tool. It's the provision of a body of tools to the Colombian civil society to then move forward and secure a much more just system in Colombia.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Just linking into that, I'm wondering, we're looking at these things that the conflict is ongoing, but the storytelling and testimonies is of the past. But the human rights violations, some of them at least, must surely be ongoing. In the sense that at least the violation of the right to mental health must be an ongoing violation, because you don't suddenly get better and have it resolved. And I'm wondering to what extent can truth commissions and the monitoring aspect of dealing with the past be linked to rights of people today, current violations of human rights that may be linked to what has happened in the past, if that question makes sense. clearly it didn't. It's something I will try and put together in my head better another time.
Sí, sí, se entiende.
No, it's understood. Understand what you're saying. I think it's an important question because the Commission has emphasized that it works in a context that continues. There's still a continuation of the conflict. There is still armed conflict with armed groups, and there's a continuity also with the experience of people who have lived and continue to live contexts of violence and abuse. There are three key things here. First, the way in which the Commission stresses the actors that continue, that remain, causes of violence that continue. There have been many years, decades of violence in Colombia, and there are structural aspects that have helped explain why the conflict has continued. And so this is a part of the analysis that the Commission has made, and also to an important part of the recommendations. How can we confront the conflict? The fact that causal factors are still there. The criminalization of social protests, the continuation of the armed conflict, these continue. This is very clear, they're still happening. And also in terms of the recommendations, we think it's important to emphasize peace building, the construction of peace. What can we do not only to ensure implementation of the peace agreements, but to establish the next stage in the resolution, in the creation of a future where it is more difficult for the conflict to continue. So we're looking to the past to make sure that things aren't repeated, but also what can we do to ensure that they don't happen again in the future.
Thank you. Thank you.
And maybe a very short comment on what happened from the Chilean Truth Commission. One of the recommendations was to set up a medical system. It was called Price Programa de Reparación y Ayuda Psicosocial, and it was meant that not only the people who suffered human rights violations, but all their relatives and part of their community and people who worked in taking the testimonies could have access to mental health or some support from the state medical system. I'm not saying it worked perfect, but there was the acknowledgement that that was needed, that there were consequences on physical and mental health that extended to the family, the society, and the people who had worked with the people who had human rights violations.
Thank you, Roberta. Thank you. I think we have about 3 minutes to go, so if anybody would like to make a concluding comment before we close.
I might just add, because, when I answered the question about academia, I answered very formally about monitoring of recommendations, and this is really important. But, one of the lessons from conflict textiles and what we've been talking about today is that another key role of civil society is about keeping the conversation going in many different ways. Art and theater and culture and film, these are very important vehicles for how we keep the conversation going and how we speak to lots of different people, who are not going to go and read a big report. And Carlos mentioned some of the summary reports that we've seen in other Latin American contexts. But the cultural dimension is a really, really important part. And these are recommendations which can also be made and supported financially to sort of support these type of interventions. I just think they're really important, as much as I look at this very structurally, and these are the very hard political things you need to do. But culture is a very, very important part, because what we're essentially trying to do is move out of being in a culture of violence. So you have to change culture. It's a key part of reconciliation and of peace.
Thank you. And all of those artistic efforts also, they bring stories in a different form. They're not forgotten on a a dusty bookshelf or file like the Truth Commission report that you mentioned is locked away somewhere inaccessible in South Africa. If there are different forms of art, sharing those stories in one form or another, not necessarily directly, it keeps people's stories alive and in contact, and keeping stories alive also keeps the stories of the people who are lost alive. They're not just disappeared. They are disappeared, but they're there in people's memories. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, Peter.
So just very quickly, just perhaps, obviously one of the purposes of this work is to bolster our international support network. And after this event, anybody that's interested, I don't know if there's a way, perhaps we'll find a way of putting our email, the Commission email, my email on the system, so that
Yes.
Academics in the UK and elsewhere that are interested in helping and getting involved can contact us and being part of our support network. That's right.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, y solamente una pequeñita cosa para despedirnos.
And just one last little thing to say goodbye. In this dimension of the work, of the artistic work, we have produced 2 tools. The good news is we're going to have them in English, not just in Spanish.
Great.
We have them in English. We hope that by next year, they'll be in English as well. One is called The Colombian Suitcase, which is a collection of stories based on testimonies, short stories that tell the stories of the exile. And the other is a graphic novel, a comic that tells the story of the conflict from the exile, told from the second generation. These are tools to reach other spaces, other audiences. They'll be available in English soon as well for English-speaking audiences around the world as well.
Thank you. Thank you. That sounds wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Commissioner Berenstein, and thank all of the panelists, Lauren, Brandon, Roberta, and Peter. Thank you for this really powerful and insightful debate. Thank you very much. Time is up, and so I'm going to say goodbye, but I found it really, really powerful. Thank you all. Goodbye.
Well, thank you.
Bueno, un gran abrazo a todos y a todas. Gracias, Brandon.
Hugs to all. Thank you very much, Brandon.